this year in the autumn. I'll be starting at the University of Cambridge under the supervision of Professor Ezra Özürek. So at the moment, everything is very preliminary. There are definitely gaps in the literature that I've read. Also, owed to the fact that I am balancing this with a full-time job at the moment. So that's just my preface before I begin. But yeah, here's the sort of preliminary title that I've got for my dissertation, and hopefully gives you an idea of the scope of what I'm interested in. So I am interested in the anthropology of emotions, in particular, anger and this concept of a regime of feeling, which I will explain in due course, within the legacies of genocide, specifically the Bosnian genocide. So if I start just by talking about a regime of feeling, I came across this term for the first time when I was studying my master's at University College London, and I read a book by Bosnian sociologist Adis Marksic, in which he discussed or he introduced this idea of a regime of feeling, which he defines as the feeling of truth that underpins a regime of truth. And this feeling of truth is constructed by the synthesis of discourse with feeling. Um, and on that note, I want to stress that by discourse, I'm not just talking about language, and Maxic also mentions this in his book, but discursive acts can go beyond language into music, dance, video, hand gestures, body language. Yeah, all of those sorts of things. And what Maxic talks about in his book is the way that political actors seek to attach feelings to specific discursive acts in order to create this feeling of truth, that something just is right the way that it is. And with each deployment of discourse, those actors will seek to stabilize those feelings and harness those effective flows. But of course, with each deployment of discourse, you can only really partially stabilize these feelings and attachments because each deployment opens up the possibility of a reinterpretation of that discursive act. Now, Marxic applied this theory to the Serb Democratic Party and the genocide in Bosnia. He was exploring how the Serb ethno-nationalist elite tried to negotiate and construct this regime of feeling, and how this has continued into the present Republika Srpska political project. If we were to think about what that looks like today, I mean, the first example that comes to my mind is the array of Serb ethno-nationalist music that has been produced after the war, which again is part of this production of a feeling of truth, of what feels right and what feels Serb. But I'm interested in exploring a regime of feeling among Bosniaks, and in Bosniak emotional life. Um, because, the 1992 to 95 genocide was destructive, not just materially, but it destroyed norms that had been held for a long time. Ways of understanding the world were destroyed, ways of being were destroyed, and it forced Bosniaks to face this perpetual question of who am I? And in that legacy that is ongoing to this day in Bosnia, I'm interested in exploring how Bosniaks are negotiating a feeling of truth. In particular, I want to understand the role that anger plays in this negotiation and the different emotions that knot themselves around anger. And I'll explain later why anger is of particular interest to me when it comes to Bosniak life. Um, Also, I am interested in the production of knowledge and the production of truth. So I want to explore what knowledges about Bosniak life and Bosniak's places in the world are being produced through this, alongside this regime of feeling that is being negotiated. Just to stress for anyone who maybe, I don't know, hasn't worked on this particular aspect of the genocide. But when I say that it was ontologically and epistemologically destructive, I'm really thinking about the way that the brotherhood and unity norms of socialist Yugoslavia were obliterated overnight in April 1992. This access to a South Slav family was not only denied to Bosniaks, but rendered obsolete as Yugoslavia went from being a place of belonging, a home, to an aggressor and an existential threat. So let me talk about anger. Why am I interested in anger? Well, because to put it bluntly, I think to be Muslim and to be angry is dangerous in Europe and in the West. I recently read Perfect Victims by Mohammed El-Kurd, Palestinian writer, in which he talks about the way that Palestinians and Muslim majority communities have to defang their rage in order to access European and Atlantic audiences. In the context of Bosnia-Herzegovina post the genocide, even as recently as 2023, we had an indictment of an imam in the Republika Srpska entity for calling the Republika Srpska a genocidal entity. And so for me, what the paradox that Bosniak life finds itself in is the following. You have this natural anger at the injustices of the war, and this anger knots itself with a reconfiguring relationship with one's Muslim identity because that Muslim identity was weaponized against you. But at the same time, the new political order under which you live demands that your Muslim identity remains apolitical and non-aggressive. And that is exemplified in cases like the Stulanovic indictment that I referred to a few moments ago. At the same time, at a state level, nominally, the Bosnian and Herzegovinian state is aspiring to accession into Euro-Atlantic alliances. Um, at the same time, you have institutions, memorial institutions, survivor associations that are seeking material support that they need from Euro-Atlantic sponsors and other institutions. So you have this multi-directional power struggle and flows of power. And it's within this context that I believe anger is particularly important to map in Bosniak emotional life. Another sort of uh, point or another point of another example to show what I'm talking about in terms of these demands, these Euro-Atlantic demands when it comes to Bosniak emotions, is the way that the media talks about Bosniaks. I'm fascinated by the way that the mothers of Srebrenica are I'm fascinated by the way they are presented in Euro-Atlantic platforms and in the media. Uh, a few years ago, when the one of the founders of the Mothers of Srebrenica died, Deutsche Welle, they had a very interesting headline, as you can see there on the screen, where they highlighted the fact that she didn't seek revenge. And so I think it's interesting to see this very complicated set of standards that Bosniak emotional life has to adhere to. So I'm interested in the way that anger is understood, the way it's felt within this context, but also the way that other feelings not around anger. And I've listed a few of those feelings that I've come across in other genocide survivor literature. So we have pride, irreverence, and revenge. Irreverence was something that came up particularly in the Palestinian literature as a creative solution to those Euro-Atlantic demands when it came to anger. And I will also be taking my cue from emotions historian Barbara Rosenwein, who encourages anthropologists of emotions and historians of emotions to read the silences and the metaphors as part of emotional life itself. Um, Another important aspect of the research that I will be conducting is how Bosniaks negotiate their Muslimness and Muslim practices. Because, as many of you will already know, there is this unspoken but also spoken expectation for Bosniaks not to be too Muslim. And what I'm interested in is how Bosniaks within Bosnia and Herzegovina are negotiating this, how they are resisting this demand, but also how perhaps there is an element of becoming one's own inspector. I mean, Michel Foucault talks about in The Eye of Power the way that an apparatus of total mistrust and surveillance can establish itself in societies. He was referring to post-monarchy societies, but I think that this can be applied to post-Yugoslavia, post-Yugoslav Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the norms that were sort of enforced by one particular figurehead collapse, and then you have this multi-directional power struggle and flows of power that are being directed towards and around Bosniaks. And I just wanted to highlight a few examples that I found interesting that I think speak to my point. In 2023, the mayor of Vlasenica, which is in the Republika Srpska entity, an entity that was founded on the genocide of predominantly Bosniaks, he wrote a letter to the Islamic community asking them to lower the sound of the ezan because it was disturbing Serb residents. Um, but what I've also found interesting is through conversations that I've had with Bosniaks of different backgrounds, that certain tensions have been made apparent in comments that have been made. I've noticed a tension between urban and rural practices of Bosniak identity, particularly in the ways that urban Bosniaks have spoken to me about rural Bosniak communities, where they have referred to them as villagers or seljaci, and not in an affectionate way. But also I have been made aware of tensions between the Yugoslav generations, sometimes more secular Bosniak practices versus the post-war religious Bosniak practices in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One interlocutor commented to me once that they did not recognize Sarajevo because of, in their words, hijabi women in the city. So, this goes back to the point that I was making before of becoming one's own inspector and surveilling your own Muslimness within your own community. And then you also have, of course, examples from the top of society, the political establishment. Recently we had elections where the liberal coalition of parties decided to oust an overtly Bosniak political party in favor of coalition with Christian ethno-nationalists and genocide deniers, which again, I'm not trying to apply my research onto that particular example from politics, but I do think it's interesting. I do think it's interesting the standards that are applied to Bosniak life versus non-Bosniak life. So within this context, I believe that the negotiation of anger and Muslimness within a regime of feeling is interconnected because of these constraints that Bosniak life has to operate in. So the research that I am hoping to conduct will be ethnographic research. I will be spending time in both entities of Bosnia and Herzegovina, predominantly Sarajevo in the Federation of BiH and Srebrenica in the RS. I'm taking my cue from emotions historian Barbara Rosenwein, who encourages historians and anthropologists of emotions to immerse themselves in the micro contexts in which emotions are felt. And in order to do this, she calls for a wide range of sources to be examined. And that's what I'm going to set out to do. So I've listed the various sources that I will be using because I want to see how these emotions are being negotiated orally and in written word, because I suspect there will be important distinctions there. I will also be including social media content, which I forgot to put on that list, but I think that emotional life on social media is its own at times microcosm. So I will be exploring that. Now, I am fully aware of the scale of the research that I am setting out to do, and maybe I am a bit naive in thinking that I can do that, but I want to give it a go because I don't feel like I could fully understand a any emotional life without looking at a diverse range of sources. I'm also not interested in doing a case study of one particular village or one particular location. Not, to take away from the incredible work that other anthropologists have done using case studies. It's just not something that interests me in particular. I want to get a much broader picture. But of course, there is every possibility that there will be limits to what I can map. You know, uh, Clifford Geertz, anthropologist from, the 1970s, asked the question, or, can anthropology ever fully capture the layers and layers of meanings behind events? So I'm fully aware that there will be limitations to what I can map, but I'm excited to give this a go, and I think this is needed. I think that the work of Adis Maksic in introducing this idea in the Bosnian context was fantastic, but I think that we need to apply this to Bosniak life instead of keeping it as something that was done to Bosniaks, as if there's not going to be a response. So, yeah, that is the research that I'm setting out to do. Thank you for listening, and I am open to questions, of course. Please be nice, but yeah, I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giorgio. Nice round. Huge round of applause for you and all of your work. I'm eager to hear what others think as well, what questions they may have.
If nobody else has it, since I turned the microphone, should I go?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all,